Two. So we're back. We had a conversation 2 weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago about gut dysbiosis. And I think we kind of left it off with the idea that there's not a lot of clarity on what like real gut issues can be, right? Can
Mhm.
you, I guess my first question for you, Olivia, is can somebody have a dysregulated gut and not know it? Like what and how would they figure out if they're just living their
Yeah.
life and not feeling any real discomfort? Like are there small signs they could look for?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And the answer is absolutely yes. I actually see so many people that don't have any symptoms, but decide they want to work on optimizing their gut, and they end up having like a lot of imbalances. For
Hmm.
example, I'm working with this one guy now, and he came to see me to address his chronic pain. He's an older guy, maybe in his 60s. He doesn't cook, he's single, he's like, drinking most evenings, and we're working on addressing his pain and inflammation, but of course, the first thing I always do in my practice is look at what's going on in the gut because it does impact so many things. But he was not symptomatic in any way. No bloating, no irregular bowel movements, no reflux, nothing. His gut was extremely imbalanced. He had parasites, he had fungus overgrowth, he had dysbiosis, so like a really high ratio of bad bacteria to good bacteria. He had low enzymes, inflammation. I mean, there was a lot of things going on, and he had no idea. So
Hmm.
I see that all the time. Um, and I'm also just like a sidebar, pretty much related to this. Similar situation. I was seeing a guy a couple years ago. He was like mid 30s. He didn't have any symptoms either. But again, same thing. We ran a GI map, and he had like parasites, he had dysbiosis, he had all these different things going on in his GI map. And we worked on healing what we saw, and he started to notice like he wasn't feeling overtly bad to begin with, but he started to notice that he was like experiencing a lot more energy. His hair started to become a lot thicker. He was like starting to experience some male pattern balding at like 35.
Wow.
And yeah, so he wasn't symptomatic in the way of his gut, but we started to work on healing his gut based on what we saw in the testing, and he started to see a lot of other improvements in different areas, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, to that point, and to answer your question about like what are some little signs that we can look for to see if there is imbalances in the gut that might not be directly related to the gut, I would say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Headache, hormonal imbalances, thinning hair, um, yeah, thyroid issues, nutrient deficiencies. It all kind of circles back to the microbiome.
The thinning hair piece is really interesting. That's something that obviously piques my interest because my baldness runs in my family and I've kept a good amount of my hair up to this point, but obviously I feel like that's something worth paying attention to. It really just does go back to the theme of like the past episode and even the past couple that, the gut imbalance thing might be a bigger piece of why you're feeling chronic pain or why you're feeling headaches or why you're feeling some of these things that you might never tie back to the gut. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
that's interesting.
you talked on last episode about histamines,
Mhm.
how some people can have some intolerances to them. I want to expand on that a little bit because I think that's an interesting thing. And when I think histamine, I'm going to be honest, just because I'm not a gut specialist, like I think of the word like antihistamine. So I wonder, like, does that have
Yeah.
anything to do with the medication? Are those two things intertwined? Like, expand on that a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. So, and I'm not a histamine specialist either. I am more of a gut specialist. But what we know and what the research is saying that now is that, and I think I mentioned this last time, having too many histamines in your system, they're now like associating that with a lot of different chronic symptoms.
Hmm.
So histamines are proteins, and they play a really big role in our immune system. And yeah, we think of histamines related to like allergy-like symptoms. Like if somebody is allergic to trees or pollen or whatever, they go outside, they start to experience runny nose or like sore throat or whatever the case is. These are like the more common things. And they take a Benadryl, which is an antihistamine because histamines are involved in those reactions. And the antihistamines generally help. But again, what the research is finding now is that there's a lot of associations between these proteins and different things like chronic pain, even PMS, insomnia, anxiety. So it's quite interesting. But when we dig a little bit deeper and we look at the gut, there's actually a lot of bacteria that can produce histamines directly or activate mast cells. And so mast cells are part of our immune system, and the mast cells are actually where the histamines are produced. So if anytime we're activating mast cells, that is typically going to contribute to histamine release. And so if I'm looking at somebody's gut and they have an overgrowth of bacteria that tend to produce histamines or activate mast cells directly, then I am going to address that as well. So typically what I do is, well, there's a combination of different things I would do, and it's all contingent on what the client is experiencing. But a lot of the time I'll put somebody on what's called diamine oxidase. It's an enzyme and it's involved in the degradation of histamines. So if somebody is experiencing a lot of histamines in their system, they aren't equipped with enough DAO, diamine oxidase in their system, then I will recommend it as a supplement to take before meals to help with the degradation of histamine. So again, even with allergies, a lot of that can have its roots in compromised gut function.
Well, for someone who's not an expert in histamines, that was a pretty good explanation. I wonder, like, I've talked to people who say maybe after the age of 32, 33, like, oh, I developed this allergy. But to me, just hearing what you said, maybe it's a case of them maybe developing a intolerance or a dietary habit that led to this like uptick of histamines in their system. Could that be the case for a lot of like late stage or like middle age allergy developments? Is that reasonable to maybe presume?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think it really just depends on what it is. Like a lot of food sensitivities or allergies in particular, in my experience, also have their roots in compromised gut function, specifically with intestinal hyperpermeability, or what's better known as leaky gut.
Hmm.
And that's when the epithelial lining in our gut that protects us from or separates rather the microbiome and what's going on inside the microbiome and the rest of our body, like our blood. When that becomes leaky or becomes bruised, or there's like holes in it, which then allows bacteria and antigens and other things that are supposed to stay in our microbiome then leak into our bloodstream. A lot of like food sensitivities or allergies again can have their roots in that in particular. With other allergies that come on in adulthood, yeah, definitely could be from the histamine bacteria gut connection for sure.
As a refresher, because I want to make sure I'm retaining the information we're talking about on a week to week basis,
Mhm.
fixing, or maybe not necessarily fixing, but nipping in the bud that leaky gut stuff can be somewhat solved by increasing fiber intake and possibly probiotics. Is that right?
Yes. Wait, Fran, I'm so sorry. There was a bit of a lag. Can you repeat that question?
I did hear that. There was like a little bit of a drag there. So I want to make sure I have this right. If you're looking to address leaky gut, fiber and probiotics, is that the way to go, or one of the ways to go that can start to cure those symptoms?
Yeah, so yes, well, there's a lot of things you can work on.
Hmm.
First, you want to work on removing what is potentially contributing to the leaky gut. So things like medication,
Yeah.
stress, alcohol, refined sugar, processed foods, chemicals, all of those things we want to work on getting rid of to the best of our ability. But when we think of our gut, and I think I may have touched on this briefly last time, it is like a three-tiered system, and I describe it to my clients just like this. So we have prebiotics, which are fiber, and there's many different kinds of prebiotics. And again, prebiotics are solely like fiber. So we can only get prebiotics in plant foods because animal foods don't have fiber in them. So when we eat fiber, they're broken down into these prebiotics like inulin, for example, and prebiotics are what feed the probiotics. So we have, again, trillions of different kinds of bacteria that live within our microbiome, and they all feed on prebiotics. And then the probiotics, after they feed on the prebiotics, they produce what are called postbiotics.
Right.
So these are short chain fatty acids, so things like butyrate and acetate, and these actually act as the food source for the cells that line your gut to prevent leaky gut or to heal leaky gut. And so, yes, you're exactly right. Prebiotics and probiotics are crucial for healing leaky gut and preventing leaky gut, in addition to getting rid of all the bad things I had mentioned. But there's a couple other things too, like I like to recommend like colostrum can be really good. Powdered immunoglobulins, so like a bovine IgG can be really helpful. What else? Vitamin D actually is really helpful for healing leaky gut. There's a couple foods in particular, like okra, chia seed pudding. These can be really good. Trying to think of what else. There's tons of things that can help the gut lining. Aloe vera is really good as well. A couple different herbs, but those are the top ones.
Yeah.
And the pre and probiotics.
Take it back to your clients who didn't really know what the scale of their gut dysregulation was until they saw you. And you brought up parasites, which when I hear that word, it's like it's scary, right? You think of something that's like a tapeworm, something that's like living inside your body and eating away at like what kind of parasites are, exist in a, kind of give, I know there you could probably go down a rabbit hole with this, but like what kind of parasites are usually present in like a really dysregulated gut? I'm sure we probably know like what they contribute to, and maybe just upset stomach, things like that. But like, what are some parasites that you come across maybe commonly or maybe uncommonly?
Yeah, this is kind of a nuanced question because the test that I run, the GI map, they only measure for, I think, 10
Ah,
or 12 different parasites. The GI map is very highly sensitive. It's my favorite test. It's the best test on the market, in my opinion.
yeah.
But they only measure for, yeah, I think 10 or 12 parasites.
Hmm.
And I am not the person to say, and I don't think anyone is to say that there's maybe not more different kinds of parasites that could exist in our gut. I truly believe that there are. I mean, I, yeah, I think that parasites definitely, I feel like most people probably have parasites, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But the most common ones that I see, the most common one I see in my practice actually is one called blastocyst.
Hmm.
And it's really, really hard to get rid of.
Hmm.
So I utilize a protocol I actually use a pharmaceutical for this. I obviously can't prescribe it. I'm not a doctor, so I have my clients work with their doctor in procuring this medication. It's called Alinea. And I use that plus a bacteria called Saccharomyces boulardii and oil of oregano to get rid of it. And we have to do like 4 rounds to get rid of the blastocyst.
Hmm.
But it's a really, really, it's a really strong parasite. It's really, really hard to kill. It can contribute to inflammation, diarrhea, abdominal pain. It can impair nutrient absorption. So that's the one I see most frequently, and that's like the hardest one to get rid of.
Hmm. I get the sense after hearing you say that most people probably have parasites that they're kind of like bacteria. And here's what I mean by that, because I know that probably sounds crazy, but like growing up, I think a lot of kids were heard the word bacteria and kind of got spooked by it. Like there was a negative connotation to it, right? Like you see hand sanitizer and it says gets rid of 99% of all bacteria. And you just think bacteria is a bad thing, but bacteria exists in your gut, right? Like it has to be there,
Mhm.
and serves a purpose. Is it fair to say that, those parasites that exist in a lot of people are probably just going to be there and maybe will routinely get flushed out every now and again? Is that accurate?
It's so hard to say. I think there's so much we don't know, honestly, with the whole parasite thing.
Yeah.
Um, And I'm saying that because, like, I've just heard crazy stories. Like, and there's a lot of alternative different kinds of medicines and a lot of different alternative practitioners that I've come into contact with in my life. And I actually saw a client recently who was telling me she did a blood test with a doctor who was looking at parasites in particular and like showed her on the screen. He did some sort of scan and there were little like worms moving in her blood.
Oh, that's what I was afraid you were going to say.
And she was said, yeah, he said these are parasites that you have in your blood. And yeah, so I mean, something tells me that that's not healthy and normal. But yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe we are meant to coexist with these bugs in some way or another. I don't know. I don't know for sure. It's hard to say with
Yeah.
that.
It's very interesting. I mean, I think downstream of, too much, too many, I guess you should say, of these parasites probably come a whole host of issues, which we didn't really delve into last episode, which I kind of want to ask you about now. And you might have a varying level of expertise on each of these things, but we talk about some, like when I think of gut issues, I think about clients who I've dealt with, who obviously I can't really consult because this is not my field, but people who have dealt with things like IBS. And offline, we were talking about how IBS is kind of a vague generalization for gut dysbiosis. So, um, are there different types of IBS? Are there different levels to it? Like, what more do you have to say about that?
Yeah, IBS, so it stands for irritable bowel syndrome. And there's different kinds. So there's IBS-C, which stands for irritable bowel syndrome constipation. There's IBS-D, which is irritable bowel syndrome diarrhea. So people who experience loose stool and like sense of urgency associated with that. And then there's IBS-M, which is irritable bowel syndrome mix. So people who alternate between constipation and diarrhea. Um, it is a blanket diagnosis. Typically, when you go to the doctor, you tell them your symptoms. I'm having a sense of urgency, especially when I'm feeling anxious or when I'm eating a certain food and it's, making me feel this kind of way, and then I get bloated and XYZ. They're going to say, okay, you have IBS, but there likely isn't going to be any. Well, I think a lot of conventional medicine and GI doctors are now doing like SIBO testing, like the breath test. That's more, I'm seeing becoming more and more common. But typically, the doctors don't dive a whole lot deeper. They'll give you a medication and say, okay, here, take this to manage it. But what I see in my practice with these kinds of symptoms and with this diagnosis is that there tends to be an underlying bacterial overgrowth. So when I think, oh, so this person has been diagnosed with IBS from their doctor, I can say with like 95% confidence that they have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So as I mentioned, like the doctors are now becoming more and more hip to the SIBO testing, and they're running more SIBO tests in their practice, which is good. But yeah, typically with the IBS diagnosis, there is bacterial overgrowth, which we want to work on getting rid of, which we can do through antibiotics. That's not my preferred way. I also don't recommend or prescribe antibiotics. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I can recommend antimicrobial herbs, which I've had a lot of really good success with. And typically I see a lot of improvement in symptoms associated with this like IBS blanket diagnosis.
So sounds not unfamiliar, like a lot of things in the medical world, something that has not quite been properly addressed until maybe just recently, which is, like you said, a great thing. Is there a LIBO? Is there a large intestine bacterial overgrowth, or do we know yet?
I love that question. Um, no, not that I am familiar with. I mean, with the GI map, we know there are bacteria like that live in the small intestines usually, and we know there are bacteria when we see them in excess on a test. We know that these ones live in the colon or these ones live in the large intestine. So, LIBO isn't necessarily a term, but there definitely is the possibility for us to have overgrowth in our large intestines and in our colon. There is SIFO. This is a big thing, which stands for small intestinal fungal overgrowth. So that's when we have like a candida infection,
Ah.
which is treated differently. There's different herbs that have stronger antifungal properties than, antibacterial, which is typically used to treat the SIBO.
I actually know somebody. I know have somebody who does have SIFO, so I'm actually glad you brought that up. She's working through it, and I think she's seeing the right person now, thankfully. Otherwise, I think I gave her your contact information, but she's like, "Oh no, I have somebody, but thank you."
Okay.
Either way, I want to know more about this, just digging deeper into the IBS blanket diagnosis, because clearly there are, levels to the amount of inflammation and the amount of gut dysbiosis somebody's going through. Where do ulcers fit into this? I think we mentioned before we started recording that I might ask you some questions that may be out of the scope of what you do or see in your practice, but are ulcers part of this equation at all?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, ulcers are, I don't deal with this a whole lot, but definitely someone can have ulcers in their stomach. Typically that coincides with like an H. pylori infection, or somebody could have ulcers in their colon as a part of like, I don't know if you're familiar with ulcerative colitis. This is an
Yeah.
inflammatory bowel disease
Right.
that typically causes like ulcers and inflammation in the colon. Um, and so, yeah, that's fairly common. Typically, with that symptom wise, I'm actually working with somebody right now who has that. And we did a GI map. We've been working on addressing what showed up. But typically, physically, how we see that manifest is like mucus and blood in the stool, a lot of bloating, inflammation, pain. But yeah, definitely more common than we might think. But there's ways to address that holistically too.
Can just to clarify the difference between IBS and IBD disease. IBD, we're talking chronic. Now, is that something that can be developed as a part of gut dysbiosis, or is that more hereditary, something like a Crohn's or something like that? Is that can it come from both avenues?
Yeah, it's gonna be mostly both. Like if you have a genetic predisposition to developing these things, plus your lifestyle is, not so great. Maybe you're consuming a lot of processed foods, alcohol, sugar, gluten, whatever. Um, then yeah, and you have the genetic predisposition, then you're more likely to develop it. We have this saying in functional medicine, and maybe you've heard it, but it's genetics hold the gun. Your genetics hold the gun, but your lifestyle pulls the trigger. It's a very common saying in the functional world. Um, but yeah, inflammatory bowel disease, it's diagnosed differently. So IBS is not necessarily a diagnosis. The doctor isn't necessarily like giving you a test to diagnose IBS, but if you're symptomatic and your doctor runs a test, specifically something called calprotectin, which is an inflammatory marker. We get it with the GI map too, but it's a very common inflammatory marker also used in conventional medicine to diagnose IBD. So again, if you're symptomatic and you also have very high levels of calprotectin, which is the main inflammatory marker, there's many ways to measure inflammation in the gut. But if you again have symptoms with your gut and you also have high calprotectin, then that would be the defining factor for getting the IBD diagnosis.
Got it. Very surprising, or maybe it's not so surprising to some people that IBS isn't like a formal diagnosis. I would think that that would be something that you would almost certainly run tests for, but I guess that's why people in your profession exist.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, we've covered a lot on the topic of gut dysbiosis and really gone into like different layers of it. But what are other, downstream effects of, to kind of wrap things up, downstream effects of gut dysregulation that we haven't mentioned. I am not afraid to talk about the more severe cases and topics of how far down this trigger pulling, I guess, it can go. What are some other like bad downstream effects? Obviously, I imagine some sort of stomach cancer could manifest too. Is that fair to say?
With having dysbiosis.
Yeah, is that too far of a stretch?
Um, no, not necessarily. I think mostly what I see and what I know when that is a thought or a concern, it's mostly related to an H. pylori infection.
Mm.
So the testing that I do, we do get to see if there's H. pylori because it's very common. Actually, about 50% of the population is infected with H. pylori, they say. It's just a bacteria.
Ah,
It's very easily transmittable and it can lead to inflammation, it can lead to ulcers. But in certain cases, when gone untreated, and of course, if somebody is more genetically susceptible or if they have high levels of H. pylori, stomach cancer is not off the table. That's something that can develop as a result.
mm.
But when it comes to dysbiosis, I'm not like generally concerned about stomach cancer if someone has an overgrowth of like inflammatory bacteria. But when I see that H. pylori and it's really high and they have these positive virulence factors, then yes, I would be more concerned about something like stomach cancer.
Okay, I was scared there for a second. She's like 50% of people have this bacteria. I'm like, oh God, I got to start like really getting this checked out. Okay, well that's
Are symptomatic if they have it.
yeah. Lastly, I saw you post about this recently, so I wanted to kind of ask you if there's any updates from your end on this. I know you're newly kind of starting to work with some more peptides. Have you had any breakthroughs with clients? Have you seen any new developments since our last episode, like other information you've kind of stumbled upon that you think is valuable to kind of share about peptides?
This is so, so exciting. I'm such a nerd, but I'm so excited to like dig deeper into the peptide research. Truthfully, there hasn't been a whole lot of like new developments since we last spoke. I have started using them in my practice. So it's been only like 2 weeks, so it's hard to say for sure how people are responding. But one that I'm recommending a lot is called BPC 157. This is the most common peptide. I've been recommending it for chronic pain, so maybe we can report back in like 4 weeks or so and see. I can give you new updates on that. Another one I'm recommending a lot, which I think I'm going to see huge results from, is NAD plus.
Hmm.
I'm recommending that a lot. I'm working with a client now who has mold, and I recommended the NAD plus injection for her, which is it's a peptide, technically like a coenzyme, but that's what I'm recommending a lot. So it's really helpful for detoxification. It's helpful for like symptoms like brain fog and fatigue. It helps with mitochondrial function. It's really helpful for energy production. So I'm excited to see results from these, but I don't have anything to report quite yet.
NAD is one that's also come across my dashboard, if you will. I've heard a lot of people talk about it just for its immunoprotective properties. I does NAD go by another name by chance? Like I feel like there's like a coenzyme or like a name that it's also referred to as. Maybe I'm just, rambling off the top of my head or something, but or is there like a sister peptide of it that is also kind of popular?
Are you thinking of NAC maybe?
Maybe, yeah, yeah. What's NAC?
NAC, N-acetylcysteine. It's an amino acid, N-acetylcysteine, but it's good for liver detoxification.
Ah,
So I
okay.
typically use that for like detox stuff.
Got it.
NAD kind of similar, but NAD is used a lot specifically for like lowering inflammation in the cells and in the body. It declines naturally as we age, so a lot of people use it for like anti-aging things. Um, so yeah, it's a bit different.
Yeah, NAD I feel like is one that starting to pop up more at these kind of boutique wellness bars, and people are like just going to get IVs of NAD, and like, it's great. I'm not against it necessarily, but I do think we should treat this new wave of supplements and peptides a lot like
Mhm.
we should treat the semaglutides, where it's like let's save it for the people who really need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But interesting. I can't wait to hear how results go with your clients.
Yeah.
Sometime in the next week or so as well. I'm going to try and get in for some blood work myself, and I think on one of our next episodes, I want to have you, and maybe I'll do some screen sharing. We'll
Yeah.
break down my blood test results. I'm a little nervous because I feel like I've been eating well lately, but I've also thrown some new supplements into my rotation, and I'm wondering just how that'll reflect on my blood work. So.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your opinion, of course, along with anybody else or my doctor, and see if there's similarities and differences between what you guys say. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, keep me
well,
updated. Also, we want to make sure we're getting a full panel for you. So if you want me to send you a list of things to get, let me know.
might just have you do that. Awesome. Well, thanks for this. This is great. I feel like we've covered a lot on gut dysbiosis. Maybe we'll come back to it, especially with the peptide topic. So,
Yeah.
we will see y'all next week.
Amazing.